Give me that chip. No, sir.
Arrest that man!
Halo 4, the game that literally started a new chapter in the Halo series. Master Chief was no longer a husk, Cortana was a completely different character, and this was 343 Studios' first ever attempt at a Halo game. Not only that though, this was also a sequel to one of the most beloved finales of all time, and it raised many possible questions from it. Like, how do you continue the story? I mean, the fight was already finished back in Halo 3. Also, how do you pick up the pieces from what Bungie left behind in the Halo franchise and form it into not only a great sequel but also a coherent sequel? All of these mysterious questions would eventually be answered in 2012 when the eventual release of Halo 4 happened, to mixed success and also critical opinion.
What the hell is this?
Many Halo fans were just simply shocked by the new direction that the series was going in, the new designs and new characters, and just overall just the new style of the game. People reacted to it sometimes positively, but there's also many people that reacted to it negatively, creating a sort of really contrasting point of view. And even though back in 2012 it may have divided some Halo fans and gamers, it's actually been 10 years later since the release of Halo 4, and this poses a really serious question. How does Halo 4 hold up after all of this time? How well did it continue the series? Was it really that bad? Was it really possibly underrated? Well, in this video, I'm going to be covering Halo 4, and of course, like all my other videos, I'm going to be covering the campaign, multiplayer, the development, background, Spartan Ops, and just my overall thoughts on the game. So with all the fluff and all the weird intros out the way, let's jump in. So, starting out with the background, in 2007, Bungie ended its relationship with Microsoft to be fully independent, but were contracted still to make 2 more Halo games, which were eventually Halo Reach and Halo ODST. After Bungie's departure, Microsoft started building a company from the ashes that was left behind called 343 Industries, which was formed with the goal of producing all things Halo, which I'm sure this company would do no wrong in the future. Am I right, guys? Nonetheless though, the development for Halo 4 actually began in 2009, with the focus of this game going to be a sequel to the classic Halo 3, but also a focus on the Forerunner sides of things this time around. The team also wanted to introduce more human elements in the story, completely redesign the sound design, and also just completely redesign some of the enemy factions. Also, a new firefight mode called Spartan Ops was being developed around the same time, and a prequel movie called Halo 4 Forward Unto Dawn was also made to promote the game as well. Contractors were brought in to also help finish the multiplayer for the game. Motion capture was used for the cutscenes, and most of the returning voice cast came back this time around. And eventually all this work paid off as Halo 4 was released in November of 2012. Chief wakes up, Pug Face, Requiem, Blue Lady, end of plot. So finally my thoughts on the Halo 4's campaign with that very brief introduction. I overall thought the campaign was pretty solid, but it has a lot of issues for sure. So first, let's talk about what I thought was good about the campaign, the pros. Halo 4's story this time around has 2 main narratives, the Didact one and the Cortana story. The latter in which in my opinion is the best one and the most amazing part of Halo 4's campaign. The Cortana story has so much emotional and also really crazy impact. Seeing a friend or AI that you've been spent 3 games with at this point and slowly seeing her fall apart into rampancy is honestly a tragic but also a really great part of the game. It adds so much emotional resonancy but also so much impact to what you're doing because it connects with the player on many deep levels because like I said, we've played with Cortana many times in the previous games. I also love how subtle the whole storyline and how it progressively gets worse. For example, at the beginning of the game, Master Chief wakes up, and you notice that something's wrong with Cortana as she acts a little funny, but she doesn't come out and tells you exactly what's wrong. It's not until you actually land on Requiem that you actually get to learn about what's going on, and the game slowly unravels you the story about Cortana and why she's falling into rampancy and that she's slowly dying. I love this for many different reasons, mainly because it's not really told to the player what's going on. It allows us and the Chief to figure out for ourselves what's going on and experience the events for ourselves instead of just being told to us what's going on, which I really enjoy figuring out things for myself. Also, the Cortana story just adds a lot more human elements to the game. Many other Halo games I've really enjoyed, but they've also kind of sometimes lacked that human element, that really intimate human part of the story. And I think that 343 successfully added these elements with the Cortana storyline. For the first time, it feels like in a Halo game, it really dealt with concepts about death, mortality, humanity, and also just dealing with the fact that someone that you absolutely love will eventually pass away like everything else in life, and how do you deal with these things when they come? It's pretty deep stuff, but I really enjoy the fact that Halo 4 attempted to introduce these elements. I also can't mention the Cortana story without mentioning that ending. Yeah, that classic ending where we see Chief and Cortana talk to each other for at that point in the series for the last time at the very end of the game. This whole scene is absolutely beautiful and incredibly tear-wrecking, especially if you're a Halo fan, and everything about it is honestly perfect. From the lines that Cortana says to you, which are absolutely perfect, from the reaction the Chief that even though he's just a man in a suit, we can absolutely the whole scene is absolutely amazing, and I just love this scene. As we all know, this wasn't the end for her. Overall, the Cortana storyline in Halo 4 is an absolutely amazing part of the game. From the way it introduced the fact that Cortana is dying, from the way that it's progressively getting worse throughout the game, to for its introduction of human elements in a Halo game, to eventual elements of death. Overall, it's a great storyline and one of my favorite parts of Halo 4. Now we're going to talk about another pro of the game, which is actually Master Chief. Now, due to the fact that the Cortana story is a new element in the story, many things are changed throughout the story to react to the storyline, and this includes Master Chief. Master Chief in the original games is always displayed as sort of a green husk, sort of not exactly having the greatest of personalities, but also being kind of blank for a reason, which is that reason is letting the player experience the events through Chief for themselves. And I think this worked for a long time, but the thing is, when you have a series go on as long as Halo does, and you have your main character be this green husk forever, well, I don't think that's going to work for a long time. You have to eventually give this character development and develop the personality for him. I'm not exactly saying that Master Chief didn't have a personality in the original games. He absolutely did, but what I'm trying to say is that Halo 4 is telling a more human and intimate story, which means, in my opinion, the Master Chief needs to be more open and open up more in his character and responses to the storyline of Cortana and as a reaction. Now, I know this is not everybody's cup of tea in terms of Master Chief, but in my opinion, I think it's an overall pretty decent approach when it comes to Master Chief. Not the greatest, but a pretty decent and also pretty welcoming change. Now, another pro that I like about Halo 4 is some of the design and some of the new art style introduced. When Halo 4 came out, it made a lot of fans shocked because the game literally changed everything about Halo in terms of design. It looked completely different from the franchise Bungie created back in Halo 3. Everything was redesigned, from the weapons, Chief, Cortana, the new Covenant, the Forerunner technology, everything. And even though I do think some of the designs look bad, in this part I'm going to talk about mainly some of the good things, because I think that 343 did a lot of the good things in terms of design. For one, I like some of the new looks of the characters, in particular Cortana and Chief's new redesigns. I do really like Master Chief's design as an overall design. Even though it's not my favorite Master Chief armor design, as I still prefer Halo 3 and 2 Master Chief's design, and even though this one in my opinion looks a little too complicated, it still looks pretty badass and I like it. Also, the new generations of Spartans that were introduced in this game, which are the Spartan 4s, also look pretty interesting in terms of design. I like their visors and some of their jetpacks on the back look pretty cool. Even though I'm not the biggest fan of their waist and showing more of the gel layer, but that's just my opinion. Also, some of the new characters that are introduced in this game are pretty cool admittedly. Like, I like Commander Lasky, and I even like Palmer's art design and armor, even though I'm not the biggest fan of her character.
I thought you'd be taller.
Shut the fuck up!
And there's also many other things I like. Also, another new thing I really liked was the new design of some of the weapons, and also especially the sound design. With all the weapons in particular getting new sounds, and I absolutely love it. The assault rifle sounds beefy when you shoot it, the needler sounds great, and even some of the Forerunner guns honestly sound great. In my opinion, it's honestly really awesome sound design. There's just many things that I love about it. Like even in cutscenes when you see the Master Chief walk around, you actually hear noises in the armor, which actually makes sense since, well, it's a giant suit of armor. Also just the sounds the environments make when you walk around in them. It's overall, the sound design for Halo 4 is absolutely great and amazing. Also, another thing that I really liked about Halo 4 was the setting of this game. Like I said before, most of the games that came before this obviously involved Halo rings. But this time around we have a new thing, a shield world called Requiem. I think this is overall a pretty cool setting to set your Halo game. All the environments are pretty unique, and the fact that we get to explore a Forerunner shield world is honestly really awesome. But like I said before, when I get into my cons of the game, I do have cons with this map and design. But overall though, I think it was a cool idea to set the game in a shield world of all things. Now for pros of the second part of the puzzle in Halo 4's story, which is actually the exploration of all the things Forerunner and also the Didact's plan. One thing that I actually really like about Halo 4 was the fact that they actually decided to explore the Forerunners for once, and actually their connection to the overall universe and story. In the Bungie games, the Forerunners were definitely mentioned, and they were always kind of there as this mysterious race always in the background, and not much was really told about them or really what happened to them. It was mostly all a mystery. Many different theories over the years before Halo 4 came out what the Forerunners possibly could have been, and even though the series never actually confirmed it, there were many hints in the series that kind of hinted at the fact that maybe the humans were eventually Forerunners. Now, when Halo 4 came out, all this turned out to be completely false, as it obviously turned out that the Forerunners were a completely different race than the humans and with their own different mythology than the one that we all thought it was. Now, I know it's not everybody's cup of tea how 343 eventually came to explain the Forerunners in the later Halo games, but in my opinion, at least in Halo 4 likewise, I think that the Forerunners were actually explained pretty decently. Now, how they were explained, that's a different story, but the story itself and the mythology that was there was actually pretty interesting to me, at least in Halo 4. Some of the Forerunner structures and rooms that you run past in the campaign honestly have some great art design, at least in my opinion, and even though it doesn't really quite match up with what we saw back in the Bungie games, I'm still pretty satisfied with some of it. I also think that the new faction, the Prometheans, was a great addition to the game, at least lore-wise. Now, gameplay and also gun-wise, they're not really fun to fight, but lore-wise, I think they're awesome. Just the fact that you get to learn about their backstory and what they were, which they were basically originally humans before they were digitally composed by the composers by the Didact, which turned them into Prometheans, which honestly is really awesome. I also really like the three classes that came with this new faction, mentioned the Knights, the Crawlers, and the Walkers, which are all pretty interesting and really cool looking in design, but like I said, gameplay wise, they're just not fun to fight at all. Also in Halo 4, just simply learning the fact that the Forerunners were a distinct race and just learning about their entire backstory, the many wars that led up to their downfall was extremely interesting and fascinating. Also learning about the Didact as a character in these backstory with the Forerunners and also learning about the Flood and how they were involved with this was also really fascinating, and I'm really glad that they attempted to explain all of the Forerunner mythology finally. And even though I'll get into this later of how it was actually explained to the audience, which was actually just really straight up trash, the fact that they did attempt to explain all this mythology and just learning about the Forerunners was honestly really awesome, despite the fact that it's not really that well integrated in the campaign at all. Overall though, the fact that Halo 4 decided to explore the Forerunners' backstories, the new characters like the Librarian and Didact, and also the previous backstory like the wars with the Flood and stuff was honestly really awesome and one of my favorite parts of the game. I also think that the voice acting in Halo 4 is honestly really top notch. As most of the sound design in this game is honestly very well done, this is none different than Steve Downes as Master Chief and Jen Taylor as Cortana, as personally, to be honest with you, give some of their best performances of their careers here.
Now what do we do?
Plan B.
I also think that the other voice actors that they got for the other important roles in the game honestly fit their characters pretty well, and overall the voice acting in Halo 4 is once again very solid. Another thing I want to mention that's kind of the last thing in the pros section was actually the visuals and graphics in Halo 4. For a game that came out 10 years ago, honestly the graphics hold up pretty well. The environments look good, the motion capture looks great, and overall I think the graphics look pretty damn good. I also think that when the game actually gives you vehicles, some of the new vehicles are absolutely great. For example, I love the Mantis in particular as one of my favorite parts and new additions to the series. Some of the new vehicles honestly really hold up and are great parts of the campaign. Now, for pros finally out the way, now I'm going to get into my cons that I have for the campaign of Halo 4. So let's get into it. The biggest problem that I had with Halo 4's campaign is not necessarily that the narratives they decided to pursue this time around, but it's really how the story is told in Halo 4 is really messed up and dumb. Like, for example, every time you watch a movie, you would expect that movie to have all the information that you need to know about that movie, well, actually in the movie, right? Well, what if I told you to actually understand the concepts and also just understand the movie in general, you would actually have to read up on extra information and extra homework basically to understand the movie. Now, does that sound pretty dumb to you? Well, it is. And this is the main issue with Halo 4's story overall. To truly understand the story of Halo 4, to understand the Didact's plan, to understand the Librarian's motivations, the Forerunners, to basically understand everything that you need to know about this side of the story, well, you have to watch extra information in terms of terminals to completely understand the story of Halo 4, which these terminals are crucial to understanding the plot of Halo 4. If you don't watch these terminals, then you're going to be completely lost in the campaign from what actually is going on. These terminals really help to explain why the Didact wants to kill you and also the entire race of humanity in the game. But this is really the big issue with the entire game. I shouldn't have to watch terminals to understand the story of Halo 4 from the very beginning. Everything that I should know about the story and also to understand the story should be in the story itself. No one should go out of their way to actually read up or do extra homework just to understand the basic concepts of the story. Like I said before, everything you need to know about the story needs to be in the story itself, which seems like a very basic decision. This decision by 343 to do this was really stupid and pointless, and ultimately at the end of the day completely confuses the average gamer who's not an absolute Halo nerd who reads the books or reads up on all the terminals and everything. They just play the game and expect to understand the story, which is completely reasonable. Now, some of the information I will omit in the campaign is attempted to explain to you in the campaign in terms of the librarian scene, but the game's attempts to explain some of the backstory, not all of it, is completely confusing and extremely bizarre. The way that the librarian talks to the Master Chief about the core concepts about why the Didact hates humanity and also the Forerunners' fate as a race is extremely confusing to the average audience and just so poorly done.
Your physical evolution, your combat skin, even your ancilla Cortana. You are the culmination of 1,000 lifetimes of planning.
Planning for what?
What? Bro, what are you talking about, man?
And even though that the terminals do a much better job at explaining the whole history and the motivations behind all the characters, I shouldn't have to watch terminals to even understand the basic concepts and story of Halo 4 from the very beginning. Overall, this is really my major complaint with Halo 4. And even though I wish this ended with Halo 4, sadly 343 would do this with later games. Now, for my next con, I already mentioned that Halo 4 completely redesigned everything. And well, like I mentioned before, I like some of it. There are some of it though that I'm not really a huge big fan of. Now, I'm sure the feeling that an average gamer had when they played Halo 4 and before playing Halo 3, just experiencing the fact that everything was completely new, well, that obviously created a huge shock to people and also created many jarring reactions to this new game. This shockwave obviously turned off many players to Halo 4 and also just Halo's new art style and direction, and I think that 343 should have done a better job at managing expectations but also helping people into this art style easier. Like for example, Master Chief's armor. Master Chief should have theoretically started out with the armor that he had in Halo 3 since that was the armor that he went to cryo sleep with, but this isn't the case. For some reason, when we see him in Halo 4, he completely shows up in his new armor, which just is dumb and makes no sense. And even better, the reason for this is not actually explained in the game. You know why Master Chief has a new armor? Well, I had to find an obscure interview on YouTube, and apparently the reason was microbots. They got into his cryopod and eventually regenerated the armor for him. Freaking dumb. Another new thing that I don't really like in Halo 4 is also just the new Covenant faction and the new designs that came with it. This new Covenant faction seems to be a random group that claims to be the Covenant as mentioned in game, and even though this is not necessarily a bad idea, we simply just do not understand or really get a good idea of how we understand the Covenant in this version of the game. We really don't get to know this version of the Covenant, at least in the campaign. We don't really get to know who they are, what they stand for, or just really what their even name of their organization is. There's not even any characters in this version of the Covenant that we can actually identify with. Now, I know people in the comments are going to say, well, what about Spartan Ops? And I'll get into Spartan Ops later, but I'm talking about the campaign here in general. And like I said, they just simply did not give enough information or context about this new Covenant faction in the campaign, which in my opinion was needed. I also think that some of the new Covenant designs, in my opinion, I'm just not the biggest fan of. For example, in my opinion, the elites are too big and too puffy. Elites are supposed to be sleek and stealthy, at least in my opinion, and the fact that they aren't in this game looks a little weird to me. Probably the biggest abomination in terms of new designs for the Covenant in this game are for sure the grunts, which absolutely look completely horrible in this game. They look like freaking mushrooms in this game. Their armor just looks extremely weird and awkward on them, and they just don't even look like grunts at all. I don't know why they approved of this design for the grunts, but they just look like straight up trash. I also think that the whole gameplay in Halo 4 is actually kind of flawed. For one thing, the difficulty of all the enemies and the ammo amount in Halo 4 is absolutely ridiculous. There'd be many times where I actually just played the game on normal mode, and there'd be way too many times that I got killed, and I had to think to myself, was I playing on Legendary or Heroic? The enemy's AI is extremely unbalanced and also extremely just not as good as the previous Halo games. Ammo, in my opinion, in Halo 4 is the worst in all of the games. For some reason, there's just a low amount of ammo for completely every type of weapon in this entire game, which is extremely confusing. This is especially true in particular for all the human weapons in the game, as you can have a human weapon in this game, but you will quickly run out of ammo for it, and you just have to switch out to many of the boring Forerunner weapons, which in my opinion, many of the Forerunner weapons are completely flawed in the game. They're not extremely fun to use, and even though I wouldn't say they're complete trash, like I said before, they're the fact that you just have to use these throughout the game because the ammo capacity for all the Covenant and human weapons, which are actually fun to use, is so low. It's just completely trash about Halo 4. I also think that another thing that's lacking in Halo 4 was actually just the simple fact of lack of open world maps in this version of the campaign. In the game, you're not really allowed to explore the planet Requiem that much, which is extremely weird since, well, this Forerunner world's extremely way bigger than the Halo ring, except, well, you're not really allowed to explore it because most of the game has linear, very tight levels. It's kind of telling that, like I said before, in the very first Halo game, you could explore more of that ring than you possibly could on Requiem, which is just extremely weird. Once again, I don't really like this campaign in terms of level design because the lack of open world level design really hurts this game. Also, another complaint that I have with the campaign was actually the Spartan Force and some of the characters in the game. For example, the Spartan Force, in my opinion, literally have no presence in the campaign. They're supposed to be these new generations of Spartans, and yet they don't even say anything to Master Chief when they see him. Well, except Palmer, but no one likes Palmer. Like I said before, I would have liked them to have more say in the campaign and just more to do than just be in the background. Also, I really hate when games or really just any type of creative medium does this, where they have to have a bad guy, and he's bad for literally no reason, which is pretty much Del Rio in this game. Everyone in the Halo community obviously hates this guy, but I wish they would have made him more understandable and also just have more motivated reasons for doing the things he does, instead of just being an evil bitch for really just no reason. Another con that I have with Halo 4 is actually the opening cutscene of the game. No, not that one. The cutscene that literally has nothing to do with the story of Halo 4 itself. As a cutscene by itself, it's honestly pretty fine. Halsey and this Oni guy's agent's conversation about Spartans is pretty cool, and some of the cutscene's animatics are pretty interesting. There's also the annoying fact in this cutscene that there's kind of, for some reason, the Spartans have their new armor on, which is weird because this is supposed to be a flashback, but that's besides the point. The main issue with this cutscene is honestly because it has nothing to do with the actual game in itself, which is just extremely weird. In my opinion, the game should have just opened up logically with Master Chief waking up on the Forward and the Dawn, picking up exactly where we left off on Halo 3, which makes the more sense. Halo 4 even does this with the epilogue, which is extremely weird because it just shows a bunch of random footage with a didact narrating, which just feels completely out of place, especially when the game where it ended off. Now, I get it. Apparently in the lore, actually the didact did survive the events of Halo 4 and then eventually get killed in the comics later on, but that's really besides the point. The point of this is that basically the epilogue and the prologue should not have been there in the first place. In my opinion, Halo 4 should have just started with the Chief waking up and then Chief just standing alone in the cold decks of the Infinity, ending the Halo 4. This would have just made more sense at the end of the day, and overall these cutscenes were just pretty pointless. Overall though, despite the many flaws that the campaign has, I think it actually is pretty good, and actually dare I say a little underrated. Like I mentioned before, the Cortana storyline is absolutely fantastic, adding essential human elements to the game. Despite this though, like I mentioned, the game is severely lacking in gameplay and open world design. I thought the campaign overall was still pretty good. So, sadly this time around, Halo was not blessed with the Marty O'Donnell soundtrack, our Lord and Savior, which honestly feels like a weird thing to say with a Halo game. His themes have been integrated into the series for so long that it honestly feels weird to play a Halo game without them. But like everything in life, things have to change, and this is the same thing with the Halo 4 soundtrack. 343 decided to pick a new composer for Halo 4, which was by the name of Neil Davidge. And with the new composer also came a new style of music that also came with it, and overall the new soundtrack is actually not half bad, and actually pretty good in a lot of moments. Despite the annoying fact that the soundtrack doesn't even feature the classic Halo theme, I still feel like the soundtrack is able to stand out with a pretty unique variety of themes and music. Overall, I think the soundtrack is pretty good, but as I said before, it doesn't really hit as well or as hard as the classic soundtrack, at least in my opinion, compared to the classic Halo games. Regardless though, making a soundtrack compared to those soundtracks is honestly a pretty hard endeavor in itself, and I think that Halo 4 soundtrack honestly didn't do a half bad job. Sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't, but like I said before, overall it's a pretty decent soundtrack. Now let's move on to the other part of Halo 4, the other mode, Spartan Ops. Now let's talk about the other game mode that 343 introduced, which came in to replace Firefight, Spartan Ops. Now, I know over the years Spartan Ops has definitely gained a reputation, but I really wanted to find out how truly bad it was, and to see, well, what good qualities I can get from it. Well, for starters, I think that Spartan Ops overall is just a fantastic idea. The fact that you can have a legit episodic storyline somewhere in the zombies but set in the Halo universe is honestly a great thing and had the huge potential to be something amazing. But there's just one small little critical thing about Spartan Ops that really just truly ruins this mode and, well, really just devastates it. The devastating thing is the gameplay. The gameplay in Spartan Ops is just straight up trash. The mode just simply reuses maps from campaign, the same enemies, and even the same pitiful ammo count from the campaign, and just slaps it all together with some shiny professional cutscenes and calls it Spartan Ops. The simple message at the end of the day is simply that if your game mode is just not fun to play, then at the end of the day, no one's gonna play your game mode. And this is ultimately what happened with 343 and also Spartan Ops, which in my opinion just suffered from really piss poor gameplay as it just reuses all the elements from the campaign and doesn't really innovate or try anything new or exciting, and just makes us want Firefight again. Now for the story, and well, since I hated the gameplay so much, how was the story? Well, to be honest with you, I think the story was overall just meh, to be frankly honest with you. In the game mode, it was pretty cool that we get to explore more of the Spartan 4s, as we get to experience some of Fireteam Majestic and their exploits, and also seeing Dr. Halsey was pretty interesting and nice. Also finding out new information about this version of the Covenant, learning about their leader who's eventually named Julma Damadam, and also the Covenant's name, which is actually called the Didact's Hand, was honestly really awesome and very interesting, and filled some of the holes that we missed in the campaign for sure. And even though there are some pretty cringy lines and also some unlikable characters, in particular some of Fireteam Majestic and Palmer.
Yeah? And where were you, DeMarco?
Well, Madsen and me? We were just making sure the ladies of Rio de Janeiro felt safe and secure.
That's right. Just Fireteam Majestic doing a little community outreach, man.
That's right.
I don't think it's funny.
I still think that overall, at least the cutscenes and the quality and some of the story, I think it's overall decent to bad, at least in my opinion. But the gameplay was just straight up crap, and Spartan Ops was honestly pretty trash because of it. It's kind of crazy with Spartan Ops, since I actually failed, the game actually ended on a pretty dumb cliffhanger, and even though this was actually eventually continuing a Halo escalation, which maybe one day I'll cover in a future video, it's pretty interesting that this mode died pretty fast, and overall, it was just pretty trash and pretty meh. Now let's get into Halo 4's multiplayer, which has been widely considered the black sheep of the series, and I will honestly say and agree with that it's not nearly as good as 3 or Reach. But I will be lying to you if I said I hated everything about this multiplayer, is that I think overall it's pretty meh, but there are good things to say about it. I think that the maps are well designed and compensate for the sprint factor that was introduced in Halo 4, and some of the returning and new game modes that are introduced are also pretty great as well. Some of the negatives though are simply the fact that the armor abilities are pretty dumb, and also loadouts. Loadouts in the Halo game is honestly pretty dumb, as for many factors, one of the funnest things about playing a Halo match is actually running around the map and collecting weapons. It's one of the favorite factors of playing a Halo game and fighting for those weapons in the sandbox. Having a loadout completely ruins this, as it completely erases that ability because, well, you can just now customize what you want in the Halo game. This was just overall a really dumb feature, as Halo was trying too hard to be like Call of Duty and other shooters on the market. In reality, Halo should have just been like Halo and stuck to his guns instead of just trying to be like other shooters. Also mentioned before previously, the armor abilities are pretty useless in this game as they don't impact gameplay at all. And I do like the idea of armor abilities, especially in the Halo game, but like I said in Halo 4, they are pretty pointless and don't matter in the overall match. Overall though, personally, I've never been a huge fan of multiplayer. It's never been a break-it scenario for me if Halo games have bad multiplayer, is that more focus on the campaigns. But like I said though, Halo 4's multiplayer is a severe lackluster version compared to Halo Reach or 3. Its attempts to be like more modern shooters is ultimately what really brings it down in the eyes of many of the Halo fans, and myself included. I still think that Halo 3 is way better, and it explains why a lot of people don't play Halo 4 as much compared to Halo 3. Overall though, it's decent and there's a lot of good factors to it, but overall, meh. Overall, Halo 4 kind of feels like a complete culture shock. It did everything new, and sometimes it did new things well, and then sometimes it did new things badly, and obviously good things and bad things came out of this. After 10 years later and revisiting the game now, do I feel like it's quite as bad or as good as people said back in the day? Well, I'm gonna be frankly honest with you, as even though this is 343's first Halo game, I do feel it's kind of underrated, to be honest with you. It featured a new style of campaign that was more personal with more human elements, a meh multiplayer, and also a bad addition with Spartan Ops. But I think overall Halo 4 was kind of underrated and actually pretty good, to be honest with you. If I have to give it a rating, I'll probably have to give it a 3.5 out of 5 Jackal Snipers. Now, after this, 343's era of Halo would truly be beginning, with many troubling developments in the horizon as we all know, and obviously the series would end up as a complete disaster with 5, but my opinions of 5 will come in a later video. Overall, thanks for watching, please subscribe, and see y'all later. See ya.